So firstly, thanks everyone for coming. We do have a bit of a tight schedule, so I've tried to pack as much info into the slides as we can, but clearly it's a condensed version. So I'm happy if anyone's got questions either during the presentation or afterwards, we can chat. We'll also be happy to share the slides so that way you can get the detail if you want to go back and have a read over. And similarly, you have my contact details if you want to reach out and ask a specific question relevant to yourself. So my background, just really briefly, so I own Pure Physio. We've got two clinics in the city, one at 80 Collins Street here, the other one at the other end of town. So I'm a sports physio, and my background is a running fan. So I've always enjoyed running. I think when it comes to bang for buck, in terms of mental well-being, physical well-being, there's not many things that compute into the time, and so I've always enjoyed running. And the highlight was probably doing the Paris Marathon back in 2009. My partner was faster than me. All right, now as I said, there's a bit of detail on the slides, but don't worry about it. It's more just so you guys can look at it later on if you want to. So we're going to start with a bit of a chat about the common causes of injury for runners. So the first one here is really the big one, and it's actually the most obvious, but it's probably the hardest for people to control. Training overload really does account for about 60% of injuries in runners. So the most important thing I can probably stress to everyone today is if you get across this first part, you're going to actually minimise your time on the sidelines. So it's a really big deal. And listening to the group before, it sounds like there's a number of people that are getting back into running or sort of just on the build-up phase. And so the most important word probably that I can share today is adaptation. Okay, our bodies take time to adapt. When we start a new task, whether it's running, whether it's strength training, whatever it is, our tissues and our body need time to adapt to those forces. Now, in terms of how much time that is, that's dependent on a number of factors. Unfortunately, age is one of them. I'm nudging up into my later 40s and I feel it now when I run. But it's also other things to do with your own personal well-being, your bone health, your diet, your sleep, all these other factors. So I've just put there the 10% rule. Now, hands up if you've heard about the 10% rule. Has everyone come across that at some stage? Yeah. So this sort of came around in probably I think it was the 80s. Now, there's not a lot of science behind it, but I think the reason it's stuck is that it's simple and it's easy for people to follow. So if someone's starting out, the basic theory was if you add 10% of running time or running distance per week, that's a nice graduated way to progress and it's going to help minimise injury. So I think that is not a bad option for people starting out, but it fails to consider a few other important factors. One of them I'll flag is perceived workout effort. So if you're running fast versus running slow, really pushing yourself versus taking it easy, that's clearly going to have an impact on your recovery and therefore potentially how much load you should add the following week. Second thing, I think your general well-being. If you're having a week where you're absolutely smashed at work, you're working till midnight, you're getting poor quality sleep, should you increase by 10% that week? So I think the 10% rule is a nice little background to have in mind, but then it's pulling in these other concepts that are really important to influence your decision on what you do with your program. Now, the other thing I'll put out there is we need to remain flexible with our programs. So a lot of programs that, perhaps you might download something from the internet or it might be a practitioner like myself might design a program for you. It might be a 12 or a 16-week program. But that should really be viewed as a guide. And the idea should be that every 4 weeks or so, you're checking in and you're updating your program and you're updating your goals depending on how you're travelling. Okay? And that's factoring in those things we talked about, lifestyle, what's happening with your work, are you getting good quality sleep, are you feeling well, how have your last few runs been going, are you hitting your targets, these sorts of things. So that's the first one, point A there is trying to really build that program slowly, particularly if you're getting back into running after injury or if you're, as I said, more new to running. B, again, this is the adaptation I talked about again, so avoid running too frequently. Now, what that looks like is obviously different for everybody in the room here. For some people, twice a week is probably enough. because you're just getting used to the impact and the forces, and maybe your body needs a bit of time. For other people, they're going to run 5 times a week, 6 times a week, you know, when they're more seasoned runners, and they've built that up over years. The word adaptation or adaptation, we are talking about daily changes, weekly changes, monthly changes, yearly changes. So the year that you run your first marathon, if that's on your list, it's not necessarily going to be the year that your body is best prepared to run a marathon. Okay? Yes, you may get it done. Yes, you may actually feel really good getting it done. But your body is still going through a lot of changes that will continue to happen over years, that if you continue to run, will set you up to be better and to, you know, be less at risk of injury for future runs. Okay, so some of these changes, they literally take years for the body to build that, that strength, that conditioning that comes with the impact from running. I've also got there the types of run, or you know, vary your pace when you run. Maybe I'll just skip to D there. So a nice easy way to start programming is to think about, if you're doing 3 runs, you've got your long run, which I always think is sort of your non-negotiable, your most important, the one that you need to make sure you fit in your program. You've got another run that might be a bit of a tempo run, where it's shorter, maybe you're running at a particular speed, and then you've got your easy run. So again, this is a bit of a beginner's start out kind of an idea for a program. And then you can build around that. So maybe your 4th run that you bring in might be an interval run, it might be a hill session. Yep, we're just gradually adding layers as your body adapts and as you feel comfortable. The vary your pace part there, it really talks about or relates to a chunk of these 60% of injuries are repetitive strain type injuries, and one that people get a lot with distance running is ITB, or iliotibial band syndrome. Typically, lateral knee pain, the kind of thing that comes on the longer you run, can get to the point where you feel like you've got to stop. You wake up the next day and you're walking around like the Tin Man because you can't bend your knee without pain. A lot of these sort of injuries, these overuse type injuries, can be exacerbated if every run you do is at the same pace. You know, if you're just in that same groove of running 5-minute 30k pace and you never sort of go up, you never sort of come down, you're just turning over the same motor patterns time and time again. So I think there's a lot to be said for running your long run slow, okay? It's not meant to be a fast long run, it's meant to be a slow run. A tempo run where you're putting in a little bit more speed work, and then maybe it's an easy run. And as I said, you're then adding runs around that. Run biomechanics. This could go on for hours, right? This is a rabbit hole for sure. Does how you run really matter? I've certainly evolved in my approach to this over time, and I think most practitioners and run coaches have. Has anyone read Born to Run? Have we all had a look at that book at some stage? This probably goes back, I don't know, 10 or 15 years when it was a bit of a massive thing, and I think every second person who would come in and talk to me about running, it was because they've read this book and they've thrown their shoes out the window and they're running barefoot. And it promoted a lot of good things about running, but it also provided a whole list of challenges. And it probably helped me to form a little bit of an understanding or a difference in my approach to working with runners. So the starting point is point 1. So many styles can be effective. Okay, you've only got to look at the marathon. Watch the Paris Marathon. Look at the lead pack. Zoom in on their feet. Have a look at their arms. Look at what they're doing, and you'll see a whole range of different things. And this is in the elite. Okay, so the way you run doesn't have to always conform to a particular style or a particular technique. Okay, the key thing here, the second bit, is by changing the way you run, we don't necessarily eliminate load. Okay, we just shift it around the body. So we have the ability to unload or reduce load on one area and bring extra load in somewhere else. Now that's important for managing injury, so for injury management. If you're someone who's had trouble with calf strain, and again, us people moving into our late 40s and beyond, it becomes a thing. Calf strain, Achilles pain, if I sit back a little bit in my run technique and land a little bit more flat foot, or even if I land a little bit more heel first, that reduces tension, load, build up through my calf and my Achilles, okay? But it doesn't get rid of the load. It means the front of my legs, my shins, okay, are going to be a little bit more loaded with impact. The muscles down the front of my shin are going to have to work a little bit harder. So the first point here is, many styles can be effective. The second bit there, point B, is it's important to understand the demands of your running style. Okay, the way you run is unique to you. Now, the way you run will present loading in a particular way. And when we get to the strength stuff later, if you know the way you run, the way you land, programs can be better targeted to address your particular needs. Okay, and this is also relevant if you're thinking about making some changes in the way you run. Some people want to actually work on modifying their technique perhaps. It's making sure you're strong where you need to be before you go too far down that path. You know, going back to that word, adaptation. If someone wants to move from heel striking to be a little bit more flat in their landing or a little bit more forefoot, we need to make sure that before they transition too far down that path, their calf, their Achilles, those structures have been given time to adapt to the load. So they can do a nice little strength program that's leading into that. They might then start working on their run technique in their shorter runs, but not thinking so much about it in their longer runs. And gradually over a period of time, they're transitioning to this variation in technique as their body can cope, minimising the injury risk. Landing point often changes with speed and fatigue. That's the other thing to flag, that even people that start out as, running on the forefoot will often sink further and further back as they progress through their half marathon or their marathon distance. So that often changes as well. And similarly, increasing your speed will usually bring you a little bit more forward onto your forefoot. Alrighty. How are we going? Do I get a bell at some point when I got
We've got a clock over there.
A gong.
Just keep going until you get booed.
This is the second point. This is another bit I want to talk about is things that do matter. And again, we could talk about lots and lots of stuff here, but I've just picked two things out. So the two pictures there, the one on the left, the first image, is someone that's considered like an overstrider. So what I want to highlight here is it's not so much that they're landing heel first. Okay, it's the fact that they're landing with their leg, considerably out in front of their base of support. Okay, that's the key thing here. What that's meaning is they've got basically a straight knee, which is going to transmit force back up along the line of that leg, potentially causing shin pain, knee pain, hip pain, and back pain. It's also less efficient. If you're landing, hitting the ground here, your force is going into the ground and the ground's force is coming back into you. Now, if it's on that kind of angle, I'm effectively it's a braking force, right? It's slowing me down. I've got to get my momentum all the way up and over that leg to go forward. All right? The one on the right here is landing a little bit more underneath the base of support. And that runner's got a slight bend in the knee, so that makes it it facilitates that forward direction of momentum and it takes away some of that jarring load. So they're landing a little bit more, flat foot, midfoot. But you can, and people do, land heel first, but with a little bit more of a bend in the knee and their body progressing over the front. And that's fine. And that's what I'm talking about. Heel, midfoot, forefoot, no problems. The key you want to try and avoid is something like this. Now, I've even seen people overstride and land forefoot. Okay, so people sometimes do this. They overreach and they actually tap their foot down first. So it is possible to be a toe runner and an overstrider. And that's sort of my point about it's not so much the landing point. The key thing I look at now is where are they landing relative to their base of support, their body of mass. All right, flicking through to the next one. The second thing that I tend to look at when I'm working with runners is cadence, so steps per minute. Now these two things are linked, okay? Our speed is a product of our cadence, our steps per minute, and our stride length. Those two things combined work out how fast you're going to go, right? Now when we're talking about low cadence or low steps per minute, I'm talking about less than, say, 160 per minute. So that's 80 on the left and 80 on the right, okay? When we're talking elite runners, most of the elite runners are well over 180 steps per minute, okay? And anywhere in between there is kind of the bulk of where most of the runners I'm working with are trying to be. Now, one big caveat with this if you look on the internet, a lot of it will talk about everyone, about trying to hit this 180 mark as a magical number. I think the important thing to recognise is it is very height dependent. Okay, a taller person who has longer legs is naturally going to take a longer stride, and for that person to turn those legs over at a speed of 180, they're going to end up running 3-minute Ks. Okay, they're going to be going crazy. So I think the thing to remember with all this is the speed you run. If you're running at 6-minute K pace and you're a tall person, then your cadence will be at that lower end. It'll be probably more into the 160, 165. Okay, but if you're a smaller person in height and maybe you're running 5-minute Ks, then you should be pushing up towards that 175, 180. Okay? Yes.
Why is low cadence associated
with injury risk? Yeah, it's the combination that as people slow their cadence down, it's also then linking in with that overstriding. The slower there's a couple other things here, and it relates a bit to this bit here. The slower your cadence, the more time you have on the ground, and it's ground contact time that tends to be associated with injury risk. Okay. The second thing is vertical oscillation, up and down. Okay. So when we're running, we want to go forwards. Okay. If we're spending too much time going up and down, and this typically happens with low cadence and a longer stride, people end up going up more, which is much higher work for the calf and much less efficient going forwards. Yeah, so those two things link in. And I put this here, the domino effect, because the other thing we find with running is you change one thing and you can see 2 or 3 other things sometimes change. So someone might give you one cue, and maybe it's maybe it's to try and flatten out your run, and they tell you just to try and not be so bouncy. Okay, that one cue might actually also change your cadence. You might find that you actually pick up your cadence a little bit more, and that might then cause you to shorten your stride, and that might then cause you to land a little bit more on your forefoot. So there is a bit of a domino effect when we start working with running, and my role as a practitioner is to often look at what do I think is the best way in, or the best starting point, or the best cue to help someone. But then it's looking at, so what will that then change? And have I prepared the athlete or the runner to be able to manage that? So cadence is another one to keep in mind. I've put there an option, running with a metronome. So if you're not sure what your cadence is, you can get a metronome app from your phone. I use Metronome Beats. Just set it to a pace and just run along for a bit and see if you're comfortably fitting in with that pace, or if you're finding that's having to change what you're running. So if you're interested in trying to work on some of these things, using a metronome is an option. But just like before, increase it gradually. So if you measure and you're 160 and you've been getting a bit of knee pain and you want to see if you can maybe change that, if you're going to change your cadence, just go gradual. Run at 165. See how that feels. Don't go to 180. All right? We're going to talk about a couple of injuries now specific to running. The first one that I'll spend a bit more time on is calf strain and Achilles injury, because it's a big one, affects a lot of people, and it progressively becomes more of an issue over time. So the first thing I want to highlight is strength. So most people that I see that come in with calf strain or repetitive calf strain are not doing any strength outside of their running. Runners love to run, right? So I'm very much an advocate for people keeping 1 or 2 strength sessions per week into their routine as part of their training program. These can be tailored depending on the part of the program you're in. So if you're in the early phase, obviously you can load more with your strength work. As you're approaching, race day, you're obviously tailoring your legs stuff down so that you're freshening up as part of your recovery. Run technique's the second thing to manage calf strain. So again, we talked about this before. We can shift a little bit more midfoot or heel first if we want to deload. Correct footwear. Chris will give us a good rundown on that from Soul Motive later. But this has changed a lot, particularly in the last 5 years. Footwear's gone through the roof. The heel to forefoot drop really matters. So when we're talking about drop, we're talking about the mill between the heel and the forefoot of the shoe. So that can make a difference. Higher drop in a shoe can reduce strain on the calf or the Achilles. The second one there's probably been the big change that's happened in the last 5 years plus, is the number of shoes that have brought in a really stiff plate through the shoe, which gives you support and helps you to move forward. And a lot of them even have a bit of a rocker on the base of the shoe. And anyone who's had calf or Achilles problems, they can be really beneficial. And I've certainly benefited from running in shoes with that sort of setup these days. The angle of the shoe at the back, so the camber of the shoe. Some shoes slant forwards or change their angle, that can be an issue. And then the final one is pronation support. So there's a lot of stuff in footwear that can actually help calf and Achilles. So it's definitely something that's worth looking into if that's an issue for you. The final one there I've got there is a bit of a preventative one. Anyone that I see that's had repetitive calf strain or Achilles type issues that are waking up in the morning, with tight sore Achilles, particularly after a run, I think just making sure that you're spending a couple of minutes on the foam roller after each run is a good way to stay on top of that and reduce the following day's soreness. That's probably more, it's a little bit preventative and managing symptoms. I'd flick back to the strength and some of the other stuff as being the more preventative approach with this one. Now, how are we going time-wise? We're getting close?
6:10.
All right. I'll just run through briefly. I want to go through with everyone a correct calf raise. I think every runner should do calf exercises as part of a program, and a lot of people, haven't quite been shown how to do it correctly. So I'd love to go through that with everyone. So can we all stand up for a sec? I'm going to demonstrate one, and then I'll get you all to have a go. Now, the starting point for this is you need to hold on to something, okay? It's not a balance exercise. So if you've just got a tiny little bit of wall support and you're quite wobbly, it's not going to help. So I'm not worried about your balance when you're running. You've got forward momentum. So what I want to train is the calf muscle. So really important you've got something sturdy to hold on to. Now, what we want to set up with, we're going to do single leg. The key thing is to keep pressure through your big toe as you elevate. Okay, so the standard thing that I see people do is they lift and they fall out to the side. Okay, so this is a calf raise. And anyone who's doing calf raises like this, you can do 1,000 of them, right? It's easy. It's not really loading you in the way that we want. And that's not how we want you to run. We want you to hit the ground, to roll through and to really push off your big toe to drive as you run. So holding onto the wall, the important thing is that as we lift, we maintain alignment and pressure through our big toe. I then like to cue people to come down, touch the ground and come straight back up. So for me, the pause is actually at the top. Okay, I'm not coming down and resting on the ground because I think a lot of people then rock backwards and kind of really use momentum to swing themselves back up. So if we pause at the top, down, tap, up, down, tap, up. Okay, let's all have a go. So grab a wall, have a quick little go, provided you've got no major calf issues. So the key thing, you want to feel pressure coming through your big toe as you lift up. So try not to let your foot fall out to the side. It takes a bit of practice. So that's it. Yeah, so really keeping that heel in line. Yep. So down, tap, up. Yeah, good. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Good. We all okay with that one? So really important to keep the pressure through the big toe. Now, just again, a little caveat for that. If people have stiffness through their big toe or big toe pain, there are some other techniques you can employ to work around that. But again, that'll go out of our scope for now. So foam rolling on the calf. We'll just grab a foam roller. Most people have probably done this, but just a really quick demo. So I said this is my 2 minutes after a run. Now you can do single leg, okay, like this, but I think you need a bit more force for most people. So just lifting up, rolling through, picking out spots, tipping a little bit on the side, okay. And I said this is a bit of a go-to, particularly for that sort of next day Achilles soreness, next day calf soreness. After your long run or a particularly intense run, I find that's a good one for relieving some of that soreness. All right, that's my little summary, and then we'll hand over to Finlay, who's speaking next. I just want to stress sleep. I didn't talk much about sleep, but sleep is restorative. There's a lot of evidence that if we don't get the appropriate amount of sleep, and amount is duration, but also sleep cycle time. So if you're someone that sleeps for 7 hours but you wake up every hour, that's actually not the same as someone who sleeps for 7 hours in the one go. I'm sure it wouldn't feel the same either. But in terms of your growth hormone and other things that are released through the sleep cycle, if that is disrupted, then your tissue regeneration is also disrupted. And particularly when it comes to bone stress, there's a lot of good evidence that, you know, if people are not getting adequate sleep and they're continuing to impact their bone with running type issues, or not issues, with running type patterns, they're absolutely more of a risk at bone stress injuries. So sleep's critical. This one's critical. I said I think everyone should have some sort of strength program to complement their running. You need to fit it in around on your rest days or whatever. And the final one there is monitor your footwear. And everyone's got a watch or a phone that can track the Ks and things these days. So that's me. There's a couple of exercises there at the end that I've just put in which we've gone through to share. Thank you. Great.